Yep.
All right. Looks like we figured it out. It looks like we were connected. It wasn't showing up on my computer, but it was showing up on Molly's phone. So,
Sorry.
we're back. Yay. Anyways, my name is Aaron Strutzel. I work at Summit Church as a Three Springs campus pastor, and this is my wife, Molly, joining us here this morning. Oh, there it is. That's why. I don't know why I wasn't pulling it down. So, anyways, and today, anything that you've seen or done?
That's the old video. I think we're still live.
Okay.
Well, it's not coming up on.
I'm so confused. We're trying to figure this out. We think we're live, but we don't know. Anyways, yeah.
How do you know it's recording?
Well, it's recording from here.
Okay.
But where's my phone? Is that my phone?
No.
Okay, let's see. Anyway, want to share where you see beauty, truth, goodness in the world?
Yeah, so the first thing that comes to mind this morning is yesterday someone shared with me that our Summit Early Learning Center usually is able to give their employees a Christmas bonus, but because of COVID, enrollment's down, which means the funds have been lower than normal. And so there was a question whether they'd be able to give each of the teachers $100 like they usually do every year. And what was really exciting to hear is that a parent anonymously gave $100 to every teacher. And so I think that was pretty divine.
There's quite a few teachers.
There are. And I don't know, it was just really, I love stories like that where it was like there was this need for this amount and then someone felt like they needed to give a certain amount and it was like exactly the same. And so that was really cool to hear, and we hear our kids.
Mm-hmm.
Try to ignore them.
Yeah, some of them. One of them's on. It was just the other day. I came in to get some work done, and I'm sure other people have felt like this. But it was just humorous, I guess, and weird, knowing that Molly was working out in our kitchen on our computer, and both our boys were in their separate rooms doing Zoom, looking for school, and I was coming in here in our room on Zoom. And this is the world we live in the 21st century in the midst of a global pandemic. So anyways, yeah. So today, as we begin, just a reminder, our weekly memory verse is Psalms 85, verse 8. I listened carefully to, I thought you were going to read it for a second. I listened carefully to what God the Lord is saying, for he speaks peace to his faithful people. So Advent, which we're in the middle of, comes, that name Advent comes from the Latin word adventus, which means coming or arrival. Advent is a season we prepare our hearts to hear or see or welcome something new, to listen carefully for what God is saying. And I believe personally that God speaks through all kinds of ways. So as we begin this morning, I thought we'd ask a question and then we'll jump in and we'll come back to this question. Hopefully somebody will something. But the question is this: in what ways has God spoken to you? Can you list some ways that God has spoken to you? People, places, things, maybe even more recently. Maybe within, we'll narrow it down to like within the last 6 months. In what ways has God spoken to you? And then our text for today's meditation comes from Matthew 3, 7 through 12. And I think Molly's going to read that for us here.
Yeah. Ron says he's not getting any sound. I don't know how to troubleshoot that. Would any of you let us know if you're not getting sound so we can make sure you can hear us? Jan, can you hear us?
How come yours looks different than mine? I am so confused.
Because you're on the last broadcast.
Oh.
I'm on the newest one.
Oh, that's why.
I'm watching the comments.
Man, we're not doing a very good job. Somebody else let us know if that's just
Ron
Ron,
or our computer?
or is it us? Okay.
Okay. So I am reading. Cindy can hear us. Tammy can hear us.
Okay.
Okay. All right, here we go.
Ron, what are you doing, man? Turn up your volume. There's a little knob. Actually, if you can't hear me, that doesn't help at all. Enzo, no.
Hi, buddy. Okay, so here we go. Matthew chapter 3. When he saw that many of the Pharisees and Sadducees were coming to be baptized, John said to them, "You pack of snakes, who told you to flee from the coming wrath? Give some evidence that you mean to reform, and don't pride yourself on the claim, Sarah and Abraham are our parents. I tell you, God can raise children for Sarah and Abraham from these very stones. Even now the axe is laid to the root of the tree. Every tree that is not fruitful will be cut down and thrown into the fire. I will baptize you in water if you have a change of heart, but the one who will follow me is more powerful than I. I am not fit even to untie the sandals of the coming one. That one will baptize you in the Holy Spirit and fire, whose winnowing fan will clear the threshing floor. The grain will be gathered into the barn, but the chaff will be burned in unquenchable fire."
All right.
Ooh.
So, John the Baptist, as he's most commonly referred to, is an interesting character. I wrote about this on our Three Springs campus page. He's quite a radical. And I think I asked some questions like, I wonder how many of us would welcome his voice or input into our lives if we encountered him in real life now, or would we shrug him off as a radical? Maybe somebody who's dissheltered or doesn't have a home, or maybe somebody we think is half out of their mind, a little bit crazy. What stood out to you of that passage? By the way, we titled this Peacemaking versus Peacekeeping. So that's in the back of our minds.
Well, first of all, what stood out to me is that John called Pharisees and Sadducees snakes. He's name calling. These super,
not very peace loving or peaceful like.
Right? These super important VIP people who I'm sure demand respect and honor, and he just comes right out and says they're snakes. I really like this version because he says, give some evidence that you mean to reform. I like that word reform, and I wonder, why we're even coming there in the first place. John the Baptist questions, who told you to flee from the coming wrath? So it was almost like, what was their purpose in coming? And then John demands evidence. Like he's holding them accountable to something. Obviously, that something is the oppression that they cause the people because of all their rules and regulations. And he basically says, don't exempt yourself just because of your lineage. And that really struck a chord with me, because I think often as people in our human nature, we find ways to exempt ourselves. And in this case, they're using their lineage, but exempt is really just another way of saying, like, what's your excuse? And I know I make excuses for a lot of things in my life, big and small. And so I thought that was really interesting. Before I keep going more into this, you can.
Yeah, I mean, John the Baptist, we talk about him during Advent because he's the forerunner to something new. So Jesus comes from the Jewish tradition, which is always like, I mean, I knew that growing up, but I didn't really grasp this idea that Jesus followed the Jewish tradition from birth until death. And Christianity then claims as our founder is a person from another faith tradition. So that's pretty incredible right there, I think. And Jesus is a representation of something new God is doing. And so here, John the Baptist is trying to create space, which is what Advent is all about. Create space for something new to come. And John creates space by almost getting up into people's face, calling them, as Molly said, names, saying something needs to happen. What was that? Was it something about bear fruits worthy of repentance? But that translation hit it. I thought really interesting.
Yeah. Where was that? It says, even now the axe is laid to the root of the tree. Every tree that is not fruitful will be cut down and thrown into the fire.
I think it was like in the very first or second verse. You brood about your, maybe not.
No, I think it's in the other version that it said that. The one that.
You just read it to me out of there before.
Something about.
Anyways.
No, it's from the other version. You should read it. Bear fruit worthy of repentance.
I know that. Yep. What does your verse 8 say? Start in verse 8.
Verse 8 says, give some evidence that you mean to reform.
There we go. That's exactly what I was trying to say. It didn't work very well. So now you just get insight into Molly and our marriage and our communication styles and how sometimes you just miss. Bear fruits worthy to reform. In many ways, Jesus was bringing a reformation. Jesus was reforming. Here's the thing, that peace, we talk about peace, it's not a peace as in let's check out and pretend like nothing is going on, pretend like there's no suffering, or pretend like there's no conflict. Actually, peace, at least here and in really the whole scriptures, is more about shalom. But to actually have true peace means you need to confront certain things that aren't peaceful and aren't really ultimately a part of God's kingdom. And the act of confronting those things are not necessarily, they're peacemaking. It's a part of peacemaking, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, we kind of learned about this a little bit in YWAM years ago. So,
yeah. Have we shared about that experience a little bit?
I don't know.
So we were in England in 2006 with Youth with a Mission, and we spent 3 months with YWAM School of England, which was in Harpenden, and it was a central base for all of Europe. And it was really cool because there was some big wigs there that really influential in the YWAM world and outside of that as well. And one thing that we spent some time learning about is this idea of peacemaking versus peacekeeping. And they were doing really awesome work with going around to all the places in Eastern Europe and the Middle East where the Crusades happened. And for you that don't know, but Crusades killed lots of people. And they basically went to all these areas, and they went and apologized to all the leaders of these towns for misrepresenting the cross. And they did like, I don't know how many thousands of miles, but 1,000 miles of walking through all these towns. And that was pretty amazing and spoke to me. And I think the thing about peacemaking is first starts with humility and admitting, where you're wrong, your lack of knowledge in whatever it is that you're involved in or complicit in. And so, that part of our lives really opened up my understanding of peacemaking. I have lots to learn, but it was really cool.
Yeah. And I think, okay, I would like to introduce or bring in another topic, spiritual bypassing in this. All right, squirrel. I think for me, I've been meeting with a therapist and exploring this idea of spiritual bypass. So spiritual bypass, to try to give a loose definition, by no means a good definition maybe, but spiritual bypass is really the ways that we try to, what was the word that you used the other day? We try to just
pass.
Well, it was another word. We try to take whatever is complicated and not deal with it and push it off. So it's a way of coping, and it's a way of not dealing with things. And I think I
To
realized
keep the peace
to keep the
within
peace
yourself.
within yourself. Exactly. um, and so I don't know if you've heard this, and perhaps you've said this at times. You're not alone, first of all, and I don't mean this in a judgmental way. But I think, well, first let me say this: we all spiritually bypass from time to time. It's all of us. We all sometimes have to deal with things, and we're like, I don't like it, and then we try to just say a simple cliche or do something that pushes it out, so we don't have to deal with it, which is not peacemaking. It's sort of peacekeeping. Oh, I feel better, and I would say that's true of a lot of Christianity in the West. We don't like to deal with hard topics. It's hard. It's uncomfortable, right? So it's understandable that we don't enjoy it. Here, John the Baptist is saying, no, you need to. And actually, he's speaking to the Pharisees, the religious people saying, you're missing it. You're missing the new thing God is doing. Let that sink in for just a second. John is speaking to all of us watching this video right now. You're missing the new thing God is doing. Can you awake? Can you see? Can you welcome it? Or will you spiritually bypass? Is another way of understanding that. And so I think as I'm working with a therapist and just reflecting on my life, there's been so many ways that I spiritually bypassed, partially because I'm a really sensitive, empathetic person, and I don't like conflict. Believe it or not, I don't like conflict. It's uncomfortable. I tend to lean towards the peacekeeping aspect. Let's just pretend like it's not there. Okay, let's get through it really quick. Oh, actually, it's all okay. There's nothing going on here. There's no problems, right? But we tend to spiritually bypass when we say things like, God is in control. Especially when we're having to do with it. And I'm not saying every time somebody says God is in control, that's an act of spiritual bypass. That's not, I'm trying to articulate this well without, there's like a thin line here to some extent. But when we're dealing with a complicated subject, like a global pandemic, and we just want to say, oh, I don't know, but God is in control. That can be a form of spiritual bypass. Same with somebody died and we're like, well, God had a plan for that. It's kind of like we don't want to sit in that and wrestle with that tension and try to say, I don't understand, I don't know. But somehow God is working, which I think is actually more in line with the gospel, especially about death and resurrection. And when you look at that whole thing, so not every time people say God is in control is that a form of spiritual bypass. But I don't know. Do you have any other thoughts on another analogy of spiritual bypass that you've seen? It's a form of peacekeeping, trying to keep that internal peace.
I think for me, the one that triggers me is you just got to stay positive and have positive thinking.
Yeah, that triggers you.
It does.
Yeah.
Because I get it. I get the heart and the thought behind it, but
you should share a little bit more, not from like a Christian, but your perspective in naturopathic school. So Molly went to naturopathic school, which tends to bring some interesting people together because you're interesting. It tends to bring some unique people together. And so Molly encountered some of that kind of spiritual bypassing outside of any religious tradition. And you encountered that how?
Well, you know, we were on shift one day and talking about future plans. And, you know, the way I operate is I'm very pragmatic. I'm very much weighing the pros and cons. And I was talking to another student and, you know, I had some concerns about, you know, business practices and this and that. And she was just like, you just have to stay positive and manifest it. And if you say those things and you say like, you know, you're concerned about this and that, you are not opening yourself up to the universe for those things to happen. And you're not thinking positively about your future. And I just shut down. I was like, what? So I'm conspiring against myself just because I have some reasonable, I would call them reasonable doubts, things that when you go into on a big endeavor, you're just weighing your options, you're weighing the reality of what you're going to do. And she said that to me, and I just, in that moment I literally had a little fear, living in fear that maybe she was right, and that, just this kind of thinking that I had could lead to my demise, my future, because of the way I was thinking. And there was other times too where people would just be positive, about school. And I was like, really, I'm having a hard time with the workload and balancing everything. And just like that constant be positive in my face. I don't know. It just set me off.
Yeah. And it's interesting how you don't hear that kind of language from people who have really suffered. You don't hear people who are really Nelson Mandela, Desmond Tutu, Gandhi, Jesus. Like, you don't hear this sort of, just think positively, or just these like little cliche things. You hear people hold space. So peacekeeping tries to not settle the question, but push it off. So it's like, okay, now I feel better. Peacemaking sits in the midst of the pain, the struggle, the angst, the uncertainty. It says, I'm not sure. And through that, we find a deeper sense of peace, that even in the midst of everything's not okay. Jesus was born, everything wasn't okay. Everything wasn't perfect. In fact, his whole birth was in many ways, a big complication. I mean, I wouldn't want to be Mary or Joseph trying to travel, trying to work this out, people's thoughts, trying to have a baby. I saw you have 2 babies. Have a baby in a cave. That doesn't sound peaceful.
No, and then just the times that he was born into.
Yeah.
I mean, Herod was mean.
Yeah. So Herod was mean. Jerk.
Now we're name calling.
That's okay. John did it. Anyways, yeah, I think Advent reminds us that we can find peace in the midst of all of that. But let's make sure we don't spiritual bypass. Let's make sure we're not just peacekeeping. Let's make sure we hold all of the things in reality of what's going on and say, God is working. And maybe it's more about holding that and being curious. How might you be speaking to me? How might you be moving, God? What lives might you be working and moving through? And I think coming back to this idea of listening, and I didn't see anybody post anything on that other than Jill a little bit, but
we have questions on the first one.
Maybe we did. I'm not sure. This idea of the scripture text, which we started off at, maybe that was the first video. We deleted that. We'll end with this. So, the memory verse. I'll let you read it, and I'll share.
Sure. I listen carefully to what God the Lord is saying, for he speaks peace to his faithful people.
I listen carefully. In other words, I pay attention. I become aware in the midst of it. And sometimes what happens when we spiritually bypass is we just try to get rid of it instead of holding it and saying, God, what might you be doing in this? And the people that hold that, especially who walk through some huge suffering, like people we just named, end up coming out through the other side, I think, with a depth of peace. It's not that shallow peace of like, just think positively, but there's a depth there that you're like, they've endured some hard stuff, right? Their life has seen some really difficult times. And so instead of, I guess the invitation might be, instead of spiritually bypassing and peacekeeping and trying to get rid of it and have internal peace, what will it look like for us to hold that peace? To say, John the Baptist, I'm hearing you. I'm hearing what you're saying. You're confronting me with an opportunity to grow and learn right now during Advent. How can I hold this and become curious and say, God, what are you doing? Who are you speaking to? What's going on? Because it's during those times that we really get to hear God's voice. It's when we sit in that with curiosity that we get to hear God's voice. Mm-hmm. Any last?
No, I'm just still thinking about give some evidence that you mean to reform. Like,
Yeah.
I was just thinking about that. Yeah. Sorry, it's just going around in my head. I was listening. I was just trying to tie it
I
into
know.
what you're saying.
Yeah, I get it. I get it. So there you have it. Thank you for tuning in. Again, we'll be back at noon today. Pastor Jeff is going to be sharing an Advent reflection at noon, just for the season of Advent special. So we invite you back today at noon. Thank you all for joining with us. Thank you for the comments. We appreciate you all, and we're holding you all in our hearts right now, as our world is experiencing quite a lot of pain. And so this idea of peace making, I think, is very relevant to us now. So thank you all for joining. We'll see you